mid-month meeting of the Nags Board of Commissioners please come to order. Do a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Not all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign. There being none, so ordered. Now is our time for public comments. If you have any comments, anyone like to address the board on any subjects not on our agenda tonight, please come forward this time. We would ask you to hold your comments to 5 minutes or less, if you would, please. There being no one that cares to speak at this time, we declare public comments closed. New business is the report from Coastal Science and Engineering. Tim Kana is here this evening for us. Tim, good to have you with us.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be up here, and especially to be able to give you news about how the beach is performing. And what I'll try to do is go through not too many details, but please feel free to ask me specifics about your section of beach if you want, and let's get into the controversies as soon as we can. So I'll rush through the good news, and then we can focus on any bad news that we might have to discuss. And I have to acknowledge Hai Ching from our office, who you all know well, really did the lion's share of the work putting together the data here. So I've just seen the numbers myself for the first time earlier this week as we were just polishing this up. So this was the flight that she took back in June to show you the somewhat wavy shoreline along Nags Head. And just to recap again what was done in 2011 for those in the audience who may have been sitting under a shell for the last 4 years. This was the largest locally funded nourishment project ever done in the world. When I say locally funded, I mean a combination of county, municipal, and individual property revenues to fund it. No federal or state funds. So it's a pretty big deal. 10 miles worth of beach nourishment done in 5 months. The unit prices of $6.56. I hope we can see those kind of prices again in our lifetime. And fortunately, there's some new dredges coming online. The dredging industry is getting a little bit better at doing offshore borrow areas, and so that helps. Any competition that we can have with other communities, or any opportunities, I should say, not so much competition, but opportunities for a number of communities to get together to nourish at the same time. 2016, we're looking at the possibility of duck in Kill Devil Hills, Kitty Hawk, and maybe even Buxton all coming in. And so that's good for the dredgers. They see this work. And it'll hopefully bode well for you when the time comes. And we hope that time is not for several years yet. But be that as it may, that was a fantastic price we got. And I think we should all be really proud of that. For the post-project monitoring over the 5 years that we're under contract right now, we have to do beach compaction tests. We've done that. We've completed it. Everything is fine. The beach, in simple terms, is looking just like a regular beach. We do profile surveys every June or July. That's the ongoing, that's the main focus tonight. We also collect sediment samples systematically, and we do orthophotos every 5 years or so. And the last one we did was in 2014. And that gives us a nice picture of the entire shoreline. And I think Cliff has one in his office. We've used this to lay out the localities for you there. In our analysis, and John, Mr. Rastenberger, excuse me, for your benefit, we did simplify some of the lenses. We were slicing and dicing the beach a little bit more. So, we've done this analysis looking at the foredune area. And so I just wanted to show you this really simple three-dimensional sketch. we consider how much sand is in the sandbox. And that sandbox extends from around the dune crest out to some depth of water. And the reference depths that are important for us is minus 19 feet below approximate mean sea level. The 19-foot contour is the so-called FEMA limit. So when we lose a certain amount during a storm, if it's a declared disaster, the amount that we lose between the previous survey and the post-storm survey, we may qualify for reimbursement from FEMA, just as Bogue Banks did years ago and a few other communities. So that minus 19-foot contour is important. But we do extend our surveys well beyond that, and I'll just mention that briefly. So we'll be talking about those three lenses, so-called, and here's the bottom line. If you just consider the dune area, this is above the dry beach, extending down. We didn't really put very much sand in that area. The little bar way off to the left that you can hardly read there, that was how much sand went into the so-called dune area during the construction. You see how that's zoomed up to almost 1 million yards since then. That's all this sand that's blown off of the new beach into the dunes, and unfortunately some into people's houses. But it's good news, bad news. The good news is you got more dune protection than you had before. The bad news is some of that dune protection is going into people's houses. And that's simply because, you know, when the beach is equilibrating, the dune wants to form in a particular locality. And some of the houses, as we all know, were perched right there on the edge of the dune. Some were actually seaward of the dune. So that's been a dilemma for us, how to handle that best. And we can talk about that a little bit more, but certainly in hindsight, we're going to need a much more aggressive sand fencing program next go round. That kind of caught us by surprise. I'll be the first to admit that. The next set of bars there, now we're going to take a look at the dune and the beach. The visible beach. This is the beach that a lot of people say, if it doesn't stay on the visible beach, it doesn't count. This extends down to low tide wading depth, so this is the main area where people are hanging out, putting their beach blankets, wading out into the inner surf, and so on. And so you can see how that's tracking along. Initially, we put a lot of sand in that area, and some of it went offshore into deeper water, but you can see how it's tracking along pretty well. We still retain a lot in that area. We're not losing too much. Now, the last set of bars, that's kind of the bottom line. That's the takeaway. The left-hand tan bar there shows how much sand was placed on the beach in totality back in 2011. And the right-hand bar shows how much is left out to this 19-foot contour 4 years later. And it turns out that's not too much of a difference. I'll work out the numbers for you. And John, just Mr. Ratzenberger, for your edification, again, this is what we used to show you, all these different lenses. What I've done is I've just highlighted those three there in the circle. Here, what I want to show you is what's happened along the dune line. This is just considering the dunes, and what we're looking at is north to south, reach 1, reach 2, reach 3, and reach 4. Those show you the proportion of the beach that applies to each reach. The red lines, the jagged line there, is the condition of the dune before nourishment. The black line is the condition in July. So if you're way above the red line, you're in better shape. And you can see that there's a lot of waviness in that area, a lot of jaggedness. Some people have healthier dunes than others. We have some weak spots. But I think almost without exception, everybody has more sand in their dune than they did in 2011, and considerably more, as you can see there, particularly in front of Mr. Demmer's house. He's down at the south end, I think you're reach 2, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes. This is one of the problem areas that we've had with the dune growth. This was the Sandspur Hotel just north of the Jeanette's Pier. That's what it looked like back in February of 2014, and then the other photographs bring you up to June of 2015. This has posed a management problem because we didn't have enough sand fences there, and there's been so much sand blowing into the dune area. This isn't too far north of Jeanette's Pier. Property owners have had to incur the expense of pushing sand away from their swimming pools or bulkheads, as you see there, pushing it back out. The sand fencing seems to be doing a little bit better job, but I didn't have a chance to go down there since June to update that, so maybe some of you can tell me how that's going. This is an example profile from that same locality. We take these profiles, measure what you're looking at as cross sections of the beach from the dune all the way out into deep water. It shows you our reference datums there. The numbers that are circled, they're telling you how much sand is in a foot of beach to those indicated contours. And really, the only thing you want to take a look at is under the +6 column, that's the left-hand column inside the red circle there. You see, back in 2010, the first number is about an 8, at 8 cubic yards per foot up in the dunes at that locality. Today, we have a whopping 30 cubic yards per foot. That's a whole lot. And to put that in perspective, you all remember back in 2003 when Hurricane Isabel came through, we got some FEMA money, we put in 6 to 10 cubic yards per foot in the dune. Okay, we had to pay a lot for that, $17 a yard or something like that, as I recall. And most of that sand that was put in the dune washed away out into the beach. So we have gotten even more than that. We've gotten over 20 yards at this locality into the dune and didn't have to pay for it. What we had to pay for on an individual basis is some people had to scrape sand back out. And we acknowledge that that's an issue. But again, it's a good news, bad news. The good news is you've got a lot more sand in your system. So you had something to scrape away. The bad news is, having to scrape it. The other numbers there show you what's in the recreational area, and this particular station has held up very well. After nourishment, there was about 117 cubic yards per foot in that reference section. Now there's about 130. So anybody that lives in that neighborhood around Station 734, just north of Jeanette's Pier. Jeanette's Pier is at 770, so this is 3,500 feet to the north. I can't remember which street that is. This is now breaking things down quickly into what's going on out to the FEMA limit, the 19-foot contour, reach by reach. So the left-hand set of bars shows you how much sand was put in there in reach 1. And remember, that's a 6-mile section of beach, so obviously those bars will be longer to begin with. And you see how much we have today. R1, you see that inset table there, has actually gained 11% volume compared to where we were after nourishment. It's actually gotten more sand. Reach 2 has pretty much held its own. It's lost 7% over a 4-year period. That's not too bad. That's almost stable in our estimation. And keep in mind, this is aggregating these all along the reach. Reach 2, I think, is 3 miles long, if I'm remembering correctly, somewhere about that. So we know that, we've got some waviness in the quantities, but, averaged out over the length of the reach, we've got just about the same amount of sand 4 years later as what was put in back in 2011. Now, when we get to reach 3, that's down the Seagull Surfside area, that last 2 miles or so of Nags Head. We've been losing sand much more rapidly, and we've lost 45% of what was placed there. And remember, too, we placed a lot more in that reach. in anticipation of their higher erosion rates down there. So we have 55% left after 4 years. You all might have recalled that I think we stood up here saying how long this project was going to last. And I seem to recall 10 years was one of the magic numbers. So 10 years, we're 4 years into it. We should have lost 40% if we were spot on the predictions. So we're pretty close on Reach 3. We've lost about 40%. But we're way off on Reach 1 and 2. Reach 1 is in great shape. Reach 2 hasn't lost much. So we've hit the prediction pretty well in Reach 3. Not that I like that result, but it is good news as you go all the way down to Reach 3. Reach 4 is just the last little 1,500 feet of shoreline. That was the transition taper as we go back into the seashore. We have lost 70% in that area. And that's happening because there's nothing to hold the sand in place. If we had one of those structures, I can't remember the name of them, but the ones that stick out and trap sand, that would have slowed down the erosion right there. So overall, when you add all of this up, we've lost 15% of the project to the FEMA level in the last 4 years. So we've lost a little less than 5% per year. So all in all, I think we're tracking pretty well. Yeah, here's one of our famous hot spots down at the Seagull properties. Remember, we had to nourish around the houses that were sitting out there. We left a little pond, and then the pond filled in. And then in this past year, after the court case was settled, 6 of the houses were removed, or 7? 6. So we're down to just, I think, two out there. So it's looking a little bit more normal than it did before. But again, we've lost a considerable amount down there. So these are the comparable numbers on a profile down at Seagull. This is station 995. The end of the project's 1025, so that's 3,000 feet from the south end, half a mile or so. And you can see that for that particular station, we only have, if you look at the right-hand column inside the circle, and just peruse those numbers real quickly. Before nourishment, we had 57 cubic yards per foot. We zoomed up to about 127, and now we're down to 73. So we still have some more sand in there. We have about 15 to 18 yards of sand more than we had before, but obviously that's an erosion hotspot in one of the critical areas. But all in all, not too bad. This is what it looks like in Reach 4. This is that transition area. These photographs were just taken in June. Hopefully it looks about like that still today. And you can see some of the rhythmic nature of the shoreline. In fact, to the right-hand side of the photograph there is an erosional arc, and these form as a result of variations in the underwater topography. So when I showed you the zigzaggy chart, the up and down, if you're in a down area where you have less volume, that's going to be reflected in a narrower section of your dry beach in there. Just to show you a photograph real quick. And the main reason, again, why we're losing so much sand down here is there's just nothing to hold this big bulge of sand that we put in. It's just tapers right off into the national seashore. This diagram here is taking the volumes out to a little bit deeper water. I won't explain why we did that, but this is to the minus 24-foot contour. And as it turns out, we're actually seeing a buildup between the 19 and 24-foot contour, and I'll show you on a bar graph in a minute. But what I wanted to point out here, the blue line is from June of 2014, so a year ago, and then the black line is the June 2015 survey. And you see how there's kind of a shift in the peaks and the valleys as you go along. And what that represents is that packages of sand are moving along shore. So in 1 year, you may have much more sand in front of somebody's house, and then a year later, 500 feet or 1,000 feet down, they'll get the sand, because the sand is moving as waves along the beach, and that's what creates that undulation that you see on the visible beach. But it's happening underwater, and that's what's controlling the variations on your beach. So I just wanted to point these out, because the arrows there, the green arrows, kind of give you a sense of what direction sand has been shifting away from the various erosion hotspots. So something that may be a hotspot last year now has a lot of sand in it, and another place is a hotspot. And these are natural changes that we can't control. They're all happening underwater, and it's a result of sand circulation by waves. The waves set up the water has to get out, it finds a way through the bar, and so on. So that's why there's variation. It's not going to be a nice, smooth line like an engineer would draw. This is more like a geologist would draw. Okay, what's happening up coast and down coast? Well, the top set of graphs there is what's going on at the north end of Nags Head, where you didn't receive, you didn't do any nourishment in that last mile. So this covers basically from the Kill Devil Hills line down to Banner? Bonner. Banner. Anyway, where we first... Bonner. Thank you. So you can see we didn't put any sand there, so these are simply comparing to the condition of where they were post-nourishment, November 11. So if the bars go up, that means they've been gaining some sand. So indeed, the north end of town has gained some sand in the dune, about 50,000 yards it looks like there. The recreational beach has gained sand. Out to the FEMA limit, gained sand, and now they're starting to lose a little sand. The bottom set of bars is what's happening down in the National Seashore. This goes down to Coquina. I can't remember exactly where it ends, but it's about 1.1 miles distance south of McCall Street. And they've also been gaining sand, but the good news is those numbers are not huge. They're not gaining millions of yards washing away from the Nags Head project into the seashore. And I would dare say that the project is not contributing significantly to shoaling in Oregon Inlet. Remember, Oregon Inlet's 5 miles away, much further down the way. What's contributing to Oregon Inlet shoaling, guess what? It's erosion of the National Seashore, which has been going on at a very high rate for a long period of time. So the sand that's falling into the channel is what's in the seashore. And then we are replacing the sand that eroded from the seashore. Eventually, some of our sand will get down to Oregon Inlet. But what's causing the shoaling now has little or nothing to do with the sand that was placed 5 miles away up in Nags Head. Sorry, that's my soapbox for the night. Okay, so just to sum up the performance so far, about 1 million cubic yards more sand is now in the dunes than before the project. That's all that natural dune accretion. 85% of the sand that was placed in 2011 remains in the sandbox to the magic minus 19-foot contour, the FEMA limit. 112% of the sand remains to the 24-foot contour. Now let me step back a minute. I just said we have 85% left if we measure it to the FEMA limit. But if we keep going out and compare that volume all the way to 24 feet with what we had at the end of the project, we actually have 112% more sand. How could that be? Well, it could be we screwed up on our surveys, but our surveys keep showing this time and time again. You just can't screw up the surveys that many times and get this repeated result. The other way it can happen, which I think is real, is the sand has actually been pushed shoreward from slightly deeper water. Remember, we had 27-foot waves during Hurricane Irene. Sandy, we had comparable wave heights. And when those waves, particularly the long period waves, are breaking over the borrow area and in deeper water, they'll just drift the sand gradually toward shore. It's a slow process, but when you have major storms like this, they'll actually bring in some sand from slightly deeper water into the sandbox area. And that is really, really good news for Nags Head, because that is poised shallow enough that it can merge up with the bar over the next 10 years. And the more that sand comes in, the better your longevity, your project's longevity is. So we look at that data really seriously, because that's a big deal for us. We know that there's a lot of sand moving around past the 19-foot contour. FEMA may only care to 19 foot when it comes to the reimbursement, but we also need to be looking a little bit beyond there. The north 5 or 6 miles of Nags Head has actually got more sand than it had at the end of the nourishment, as I've just pointed out. And this kind of reinforces the notion that the north end is much more stable than the south end. We've known that for a long time, but we finally have verification of that. The central reach, Reach 2, around Jeanette's Pier, that area has been just remarkably stable, very healthy, and I think people in that reach have a lot to be happy about. Reach 3, which again is a fairly short reach, I think it's 9,000 feet long, encompassing Surfside and Seagull. We've lost 45%. I was just reading those backwards. Yeah, sorry. 45% in Reach 3 and 70% in Reach 4. Upcoast area has gained about 100,000 cubic yards to the FEMA limit. Downcoast Reach has gained about 125,000 cubic yards to the FEMA limit. So that's a pretty small fraction of the total volume. The annual erosion rate, we look at that carefully and compare it with our design. So far, we've lost 690,000 cubic yards to the -19 contour. That's an erosion rate of 3.6 cubic yards per foot per year versus 5.2 cubic yards per foot per year, which was the original design. So we're ahead of schedule there. If we take it out to the 24-foot contour, we actually have gained sand. So just to wrap up here, here's some things which may or may not be what you all have in mind and we can discuss, but last fall, we discussed the possibility of doing an additional fall survey this year or possibly next year, just to track how things are doing after the summer season, after we get through some fall storms. That's still on the books, but if you want to modify that schedule, that's fine, we can discuss that. We're scheduled to have a borrow area sand survey in the summer of 2016, and that will be important going forward for any other nourishment projects to confirm that there's still sand out there in sufficient quantity. Clearly, we need to continue our efforts with the dune management plan, and I haven't seen Dave Ryan here today.
He's out of town, sister.
He's out of town. Yeah, because I was going to say he's been spearheading that effort and knows far more than I do about the specifics of it. Short-term remedial measures, sand scraping, I put that down because, you know, from time to time we will get a call. I know some of you get calls from property owners who are in the critically eroding areas, i.e. Reach 4. And I've explained to people that it's not very cost effective to mobilize a big ocean-going dredge to touch up a hot spot, and about the only options that you have, practically speaking, is to scrape sand right off the beach. And we don't really want to do that here, but that's one alternative that could be done with CAMA permitting. And the other would be to truck in sand on an emergency basis. There are really no other solutions for remediating that area. The long-term solution, the long-term management plan is really periodic renourishment. And then the question is, when should that be done? Well, I think you already have in your management plan that once the project reduces to 50% of its volume, then it's time to start thinking about renourishment. Whether that's going to be in 2018, 2020, we're not really sure. I'm hoping it'll go until 2020 at least before we get down to the 50% mark, and we'll be ahead of schedule. But clearly we're going to hit the zero remaining in a couple of those reaches, like Reach 3 and Reach 4. We're going to see them hit the zero before anything hits zero in the other two reaches. So again, that's something that needs to be discussed at some point. We're ready to initiate work or advise you to go out for a procurement, for engineering services to get rolling next year so that you can anticipate the slow process for going through for this. So that's just a quick timeline there. And that is, I think that's all I've got for the presentation. But I just can't thank you enough for your support over the last 4 years. It's great to come up here and give you good news, but we realize that there's no perfect good news story for any of these projects. There's always going to be some little hiccup that we have to deal with, and we're used to it. And let's figure out the best way that we can, keep as many people in the town as happy as we can. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any questions for Tim while he's here? Commissioner Cohn?
Jim, just a question. In Reach 1, which was really good news, did you observe any hot spots in there as well?
Yes.
Okay.
But even the hot spots had more sand than they did before. If I could flip back, maybe we could find a couple.
It's also that it's just hard to figure out exactly where we're talking about.
Exactly.
I'm having a lot of questions out of the village for one, and out of the historic district for the other.
This is just showing how much is in the dunes, so that's not the full amount. Station, okay, you see that wherever the black line is close to the red line, not much has changed in that particular dune.
Point.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, like right here, that particular station, pretty much the same at that locality. That's station 580 or so. Not too much has changed there. That's the historic district, I believe. Here's another spot here. This is just south of Jeanette's Pier. Okay, that's that dune may be the one right in front of the motel.
Comfort Inn.
I think the one just to south of Comfort Inn. What's that little low brick building?
The Dolphin?
Dolphin.
That's to the north of Comfort Inn.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is real close. But anyway, that's an example. Now that's just looking at what's in the dune. The other one that shows overall, okay, this is what's overall now. And of course, we're now comparing June June 14 with June 15, just to show that these are moving around. But these all have healthy volumes up in this area. So I think to answer your question, on a site-specific basis, Ms. Cahoon, would be, we really just have to, if you hear of a property owner or particular locality that is curious about what the condition is, we could spotlight that on a profile and, you know, bring the
Okay.
data up.
Any other questions for Tim?
So if, am I understanding this right, that you would count that as a hotspot?
It's got less volume, but still, we're tracking, you know, we have, here are the hot spots down here. Here's, look, 800 cubic yards a foot, 800 cubic yards a foot. Anything between 800 and 900 cubic yards a foot out to that reference contour is pretty healthy relative to other sections of beach.
Problem is, people don't
These
look
are-
at that.
These are hot spots.
They don't look at that contour of 19 and 24 feet. They only look at what's visible
Yeah.
right there to them.
Dry sand beach is what they're looking
Yeah,
at.
that's what they look at.
And again, I think if you just look at the dune, you can spot them here. You know, these are areas that, if you're below 20 cubic yards a foot, you don't have enough dune protection to withstand a 100-year storm or a 50-year storm. I could go into the technicalities there, but ideally what you want is everybody to have more sand in their dunes for the protection. And some of these areas just don't for whatever reason.
Kim, as this offshore sand moves in waves, like you talked about, what's a hot spot this year might not be a hot spot next year. We'd really have to look at it year by year and see what's happening.
Right.
'Cause if somebody has an emergency situation today, it might not have been last year, and it might not be next year. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Tim, it looks like in the last 3 miles, reaches 3 and 4, we've only have 53.8% of the sand left. Do you have a recommendation on what we should do to that area?
Well, again, because we have no way of just holding that big bulge, you know, we built the beach much wider down there to begin with, and that created an artificial bulge, and then we had to cut back into the national seashore. So there's just nothing to hold it in place. And when you put a big mound out there in the ocean, it's going to be attacked by waves, and the sand's going to spread. And there's just no good solution for that without just coming back with another big pile of sand on a more frequent basis, just targeting that area. But I think long-term, we're much better taking a community-wide approach here and creating a profile that's what we consider ideal for everybody. One that has a high dune, a wide beach, enough protection, and then at the south end, to avoid this problem long-term, you've got to figure out a way of holding the sand in place. And there are two ways of doing that. There's that structure that sticks out from the beach that I can't name, and there's a structure that runs parallel to the beach just offshore. Sort of like an artificial reef, but higher. And those are the only two cost-effective ones. So, but they're politically untenable right now.
You wouldn't recommend a short-term nourishment repair for just that area rather than the entire beach?
Well, we still have, in almost every case, if there's,
Like, we
Where's
might
that
have
bar
to
here?
repair that area every 5 years and the rest of it every 10 years. Is that feasible, something like that feasible?
sorry, I'm looking for the bars. See, if we wanted, if 800 cubic yards per foot was the magic number, that's the minimum that we want everywhere. You can see at a glance that we've got about 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet at the south end that doesn't have that.
Right.
So take that 2,000 feet, put 100 cubic yards per foot in, that's 200,000 cubic yards. Then how do you get it there? You could truck in 200,000 cubic yards from the Currituck spit like we did, or you can bring in a dredge. The problem with bringing in a dredge is the initial mobilization is
So much, right?
$2 or $3 million just to do that spot. So you're either paying the mobilization and a lower cost for pumping, or just trucking at a higher cost. And at $20 a yard, which is what it would cost to bring it in, 200,000 yards at $20 a yard, there's $4 million, if I did my math correct. So if there's $4 million to address that erosion hotspot, and that's only going to last for
5 years.
probably not 5 years. So that's the dilemma that we're facing. If we nourished the seashore, extend down another mile, then they would be the ones that would have the hot spot. And the part that we put on the seashore, that first mile, would back up the sand in the area where we need it. But, you know, that means getting permission from the seashore to nourish that.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner Ratzenberger?
How much of a taper did we have in Reach 4? I forget it, I don't have my notes.
Well, it was about 1,500 feet. We started actually tapering in Reach 3 for
Right.
about 500 feet worth. So we were already tapering because Reach 3, when we put it in, it was 400 feet wide. So we had to come from there down to 0.
Let me ask a question. Suppose we ran that thing all the way down to the town line with no taper.
Well,
We nourished the beach all the way to the town line and stop.
it would buy you time. It would buy you some more time, and then the seashore would end up getting, you know, that.
Let me ask another
Quicker.
question. Suppose the seashore cooperated and said, we don't care if you taper onto us.
Fine, if you feel like, I think if it's my money, I would do the first. Put it in front of your houses, at least buy 6 months or something before you get the nature will make the taper for you.
I understand, but I'm just,
Okay.
you're right. Groins are out of the question. The new ones authorized aren't anywhere close to here, of course. But,
These are some of the most intractable erosion problems. We're dealing with one at a place in South Carolina that has a seawall, and the community only has 2 miles of shoreline, not even that, 1.5 miles. And they just keep putting sand in front of the seawall, and it just keeps going down to a wilderness area down coast. And, you know, they've been trying to get a terminal growing there, but there's opposition from this quarter, opposition from that quarter. Pretty soon you're running out of quarters. So it's a tough one. But we just restored a beach at Folly Beach County Park. Hai-Ching just did a paper up in Boston about it. That area was 3,000 feet long at the south end of Folly Beach. And for a number of reasons, the spit would just slough sand into the channel very quickly, exacerbated by some navigation projects. So we got a permit to build a terminal groin there, and fortunately, the powers that be let us do that. We nourished, and so the beach is holding up very nicely. And we put extra sand in, so it's bypassing the groin, it's going down coast. But that was a case where the park had received nourishment 11 times between 1979 and 2005. I mean, how many times do you need to nourish before you get the picture that maybe we should be doing something else? And you know, I think we'll get to that point someday in the future, but we're still politically in this state. Just the fact that we've got a nourishment project in place is pretty remarkable. You know, I mean, thanks to just the concerted effort of this commission over a long period of time to, you know, going up against a lot of opposition, a lot of people who didn't think it would work. And, you know, if you want to focus on the glass not half full, well, the glass is 90% full, 85% full. So if you're worried about that last 15%, you know, we can't help you. We can't do it perfectly. So.
Anything else? Tim, we thank you a lot for your, yeah.
Harry, I just would ask that this report be made available to those citizens that want to get it, either on a disc or whatever. There's been people asking for the reports, so I'd like to make sure that they're allowed to get it.
We've
Made it freely available.
Dr. Connors left us with some copies of the handout that you just got that we can make public, and we can also copy this presentation on a disc if people want that disc, and we can have it. I think we can have it on our YouTube site tomorrow, but we can also have a hard disk if folks prefer that.
I think we need both.
Yeah.
Tim, we'll be back in touch with you.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item referred to, a presentation from a town attorney. Mr. Lighty, you said you needed just a very brief closed session.
Yes, sir, in order to discuss the town's pending condemnation actions.
Okay, let's defer that until we need under my agenda, we need also a brief closed session. So defer that until we get to my agenda then.
All right, that's fine.
Next item, items referred to and presentation from our town manager, Mr. Augman, or?
Yes, sir. At your last meeting, the board authorized the resolution that would allow us to go forward with applying for a grant from Trillium for the site at Dowdy's, Dowdy Park. The Deputy Town Manager, Andy Garman's going to present to you now a request for authorization to apply for another grant for Dowdy Park from the Dare County Tourist Bureau.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. We've been discussing Dowdy Park for a long time, and as part of your budget process this year, we talked about our plan going forward for Phase 1 for the first year. You were aware that we applied for a part-of grant earlier in the year. We're still awaiting the results of that. Obviously, the state budget is being adopted. We'll have an impact on that moving forward, and hopefully sometime in the next few months, the authority would meet and make the decision on that grant. We had always intended to apply for a Visitors Bureau grant to match the part-of grant, should we get that. And that's where we're at right now. That grant is due at the end of September, and so we're in the process of preparing the application. We wanted the board's authorization to make that application. Originally, we talked about applying for a $300,000 part-of grant, and then applying for a $150,000 grant from the Visitors Bureau, and then using $150,000 from our fund for Parks and Paths to match that. Since the Trillium grant came forward, which was a very unique opportunity for us, that is potentially going to provide us with more matching funds than we originally anticipated. And so with that, what the staff is suggesting is that we increase our request from the Visitors Bureau to $250,000 so that we would have more matching funds from Trillium and also from Pardiff, and not needing to increase our town cost share to do that. So essentially what we're asking for the board to do is authorize us to make the application to the Visitors Bureau for $250,000. It's been my understanding that they have funded projects greater than that amount in the past. Also, I think that it's also my understanding that should they not have the funds to fund that full request, they may fund a lower request, so I'm not sure there's any risk in doing that. So given the grant opportunities we have available to us and the timing, I think that we would like to make the request for the board to authorize us to do that. And obviously, if we get several of these grants, we'll be working quickly to prepare a refined plan for Dowdy and get this first phase constructed, by sometime next summer. So it'll be a lot of work in a short amount of time, but hopefully we can do it.
Let's hope so. Any questions for Andy? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Seconded. Any discussion? Not all in favor of asking for a $250,000 grant for Dowdy Park from the Outer Bank Visitors Bureau, signify by singing aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign, it's so ordered.
Thank
Good
you.
luck. Good
Thank
luck.
My only question out of all that is if all of this money falls out of the sky on us at once, are we capable of spending it that quickly? I mean, it's from an engineering, construction, planning, point of view. If we got, that's a lot of planning to make that work. Originally a 3-year project.
I think and we can pass that on to Andy. In my opinion, we're far enough along with the master plan that we can very readily get it engineered and done.
We can do it. We have fun doing it, too.
Yeah.
Not too many opportunities to present like this, but I think we are far enough along, and I also think there's some time built into some of these grants that if we get pushed up against a time crunch, that we can get some time under the circumstances to extend the deadlines.
I think the Pardiff grant and the Visitors Bureau grant give us enough time. The Trillium grant, they had the most stringent timeline. They wanted things done by next summer, but they said that, should we need additional time, they could work with us. I think the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem remember that discussion. And
Right.
So I think that we would, be able to get through the process. They will give us some design help on the Trillium grant just for that aspect of it. So, if we have an engineer develop a site plan, provide a footprint for these playground areas, they'll help us design that portion of it. So.
I think they're going to want to see the intent, and we can clearly show that we're obligated and committed to expending the funds.
Some of the work on the Trillium grant, it makes a lot of sense to have that engineering subcontracted, so that therefore that can be worked together and make the whole project move along a lot faster. They've got engineering firms that are used to doing their work and their requirements, and so they can move that along pretty quickly. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could also ask for a closed session, add to the closed session discussion of a personnel issue.
Okay, let's keep that under my agenda, if you would, please.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Ratzenberger, you have a report from ARPO?
No, not really a report. Roberta?
Yes, sir.
And I sent you all this. In October, we will finalize a lot of the work we've been doing, most of which I talked about earlier, and I won't go into again, but they did send out the legislative priorities for the region. This is the draft for consideration, and I wanted to get any input from the board so I could feed it back to them. The top part of it that's not up there is just a mission, a position, and you know, our solutions are continue to explore funding approaches for equitable transportation for all. But here's the four things, and I don't think on the surface there's anything wrong with these four items, or the big ticket items that would be in the region. And I just wanted any comments from the board. Now, the first one, the 6417 Bullet, will probably do nothing for us. It's west of us, but it's good for the region. Everybody to the west is excited, as are people to the south and even the west. I mean, that's, the ferry system, obviously that's in, and my only comment on the ferry system one is to maybe try and include a untold in there, T-O-L-L-E-D, not T-O-L-D, in there, because that the funding solution is to toll them, but that's not the one we want. Our own maintenance funds, I've talked about them before. I think Malcolm Fearing's offer of letting us use the unused snow, but letting us move sand like they clear snow coming from different, I think he got his wrist slapped for that. And I don't think that's happening, so we still need some maintenance funds. And of course, the bridges, particularly Alligator River.
Very, very good. Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions for John?
I'll just take that.
Any other commissioners have anything you would like to bring to the board tonight? Let's go into closed session at this time. And that would be under,
I'll be glad to give
yes,
it to you. Mr. Mayor.
143, 318, 11, A6, and others,
And A3.
and A3.
In order to confer with the town attorney regarding the town's condemnation actions and in order to discuss confidential personnel matters.
Okay. Do I have the motion?
So moved.
Second. Motion made and second. Any discussion? Not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. And we shall return shortly. Board of Commissioners back in open session. Mr. Lighty, would you report out on the closed session, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. The board did confer with the town attorney regarding the town's pending condemnation actions and did give some authority and instructions to the town's attorney. The town also took action to approve a new 2-year contract for the manager, but no other actions were taken.
Thank you very much. Any other business we need to talk about tonight? If not, we'll recess to session tomorrow morning at 8:30. Have a quick evening.